Thank you, everyone, for being here on time. And I think to honor everyone's time, I'm going to just introduce our teacher, our Rav for today. Chaya Lerner is an LCSW social worker and has been doing this work for many, many years. She's the daughter of Holocaust survivors and is still exploring her story and her history. And I know she's going to Germany this fall to make some connections with her family history, which is incredible. And maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that. She served the Surfside disaster families when the buildings fell in Miami, and she was on the ground there to not only bring solace to them, but then to document that experience and then teach others what she learned about care in the disaster zone, which is incredible, a whole nother program. She's a therapist specializing in individual couples and family therapy and maintains a private practice in Miami. She's also a recent graduate of the AOP, and she is a musmach with Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal as a rabbinic pastor. And that's exciting. She has 30 years of experience working with couples and families, specializing in death education, Torah, Kabbalah, grief, loss, trauma, and spiritual issues. So I am just delighted for the first of our ongoing education programs to introduce Reb Chaya Lerner as our teacher today. Take it away, Reb Chaya.
Thank you, Reb Lisa. So I'm also the co-chair of the Rabbinic Pastor Association.
Yeah, I forgot to mention
and
that.
It's an honor to start off this program. So because this is the first of many, I hope we're going to do a Shechianu. Baruch atah Yah, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shechianu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. So one of the let's start off with a joke. This was just recently, it was told as to Mark Leibowitz, Rabbi Mark Leibowitz. So a woman goes to her daughter's room and says, "You've got to get up and go to shul, go to synagogue." Her daughter says, "No, I don't want to." Mother says, "Why not?" She said, "Because I don't like them and they don't like me." And says, "But you have to. You're the rabbi and you're 40 years old." It's an old joke, but one that I think is appropriate in this situation. So as I share the screen, I also want to say that one of the very first teachings of my father of blessed memory was to always think in terms of that in a Jewish setting. Let me get rid of this. Share. Let me get rid of that. In a Jewish setting, when you have two or more Jews, you have three or more opinions. This was brought to me, this was like brought to life to me when many years ago, when I started my career as a Holocaust case manager, I was in a meeting with Holocaust survivors. And there was actually an argument about who was worthy, the people in the camps, the hidden children, or the people who got out early. And above all else, they only agreed on one thing, that the Russians didn't deserve anything, which is quite sad because the Russians, the Soviet Union, suffered the most during the Holocaust. So it just goes to show you that conflict is very much a part of the Jewish experience. We all know that at the very beginning, after convincing the Israelites to leave Egypt, that they started complaining and there was major conflict. And soon we'll be talking about Korach and the leadership there. And so conflict has been with us from the very beginning. We may even say that it's Adam and Eve, Chava and Adam had conflict. So nobody is immune. So the first thing that I want to talk about is anger. So congregations, synagogues, and when I mention synagogues, I also mention organizations of any kind. So congregants want to know that their synagogue or their organization is in the right hands. So they're given us as leaders the trust and knowing that we have the experience to do the right thing. They're also conscious and mindful of how the synagogue or the organization is presented in the larger community. So thinking about even pre-COVID, many synagogues were streamed on YouTube and Facebook. And then COVID hit, and then now we're on to Zoom. And how does that present? How do we present as an organization when it starts to spill out, the conflict starts to spill out onto the newspapers, which unfortunately, being that I was in my former synagogue, it did when we had a conflict with the rabbi. So that spilled out onto the Miami Herald. I live in Miami, Florida. And this is a really controversial issue. There's a disagreement about whether politics should be spoken on the Bima. Everyone knows about the rabbi in Texas that had been taken hostage. He and his congregants were taken hostage, but he's not there anymore. And the reason is because he touched that third rail in Israel, in the Jewish community. He started talking about the Palestinians. The same thing happened with CBST, which is the largest gay and lesbian synagogue in New York. The Rabbi Kleinbaum, had started talking about pro-Palestinian issues, compassion to the Palestinians. And again, her position got very tenuous. I think she's still there, but I'm not sure. We had a rabbi here in Miami who started talking. He actually talked to me about wanting to bring in Muslims and to have a community, a connection to Muslims. Unfortunately, that also set off political divisions in the community. Another rabbi wanted to bring in Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is also the head of the DNC in Florida. Well, the guy that objected was also the guy, Stanley Tate, who was involved in the Gore-Bush political fiasco in Supreme Court. So when you start in a community to talk about Israeli and Palestinian politics, you know that's going to be a firestorm. What about our anger and how we feel? We have committed ourselves into bringing the best of Jewish renewal. We know and honor Reb Zalman of blessed memory. We honor his teachings. We honor all of our teachers' teachings. And so we want to bring that into our communities. We want to engage in deep ecumenism. We want to have a relationship with Muslims, with Catholics, with Christians, with Buddhists, believing what Reb Zalman said, that each one of us is an integral part of the whole. And so, but when you have people who are very, very stridently pro-Israel and everything that Israel does is perfect, then that leads to some dissension between individuals. And we could see that happening as I was formulating this concept of a conflict resolution. We could see this happening, that so many of us want to be able to be compassionate and help out the Muslims, the Palestinians, and at the same time we have strident Zionists. We want to be able to daven with Kavana. We want to be able to, as Reb Marsha and Reb Zalman would say, take that dryness that was taken out after post-Shoah and bring our own hearts, our own compassion, our own deep spirituality into the community. And sometimes that's not what, especially that's not whether it's Reformed Constructionist, Reconstructionist, or Conservative Orthodox. They don't want that kavana. They want to open the book to Mishkan Tefillah and read the same prayers over and over and over again. And that, I know for me as a Jewish renewal person, that's like, oh my God, no. We want to be involved in social justice. How many of us want to be another Arthur Westow, to go out into the streets, to get arrested, to do something for the community? And yet we know that that would be an objection to certain members in our community. There's also an anxiety and fear. Congregants don't know what Jewish renewal is about. Sometimes we don't even know. There was a discussion on the listserv about who are we? Are we thank you, Lisa, for saying the benign virus, because that's how I've always been told that it was. But, I always look at it as gospel, bringing that joy and love, that Hasidism to a Jewish service versus the Protestantism of some congregations, that they feel more comfortable in that setting. They want to grow up hearing the old cantorial music of their grandparents or Debbie Friedman, when we really want to hear more Sheffa Gold, or we want to hear Lisa Levine. So, all these different factors bring into the conflict, and we need to look at that and say, how do we deal with that? How do we bring all of these aspects and live peacefully? The other element is transference versus countertransference. If anything could be saved by Sigmund Freud, it's this concept. Everything else, not so much. But the idea that our congregants or the people that we are dealing with look at us and they say, you remind me of a parent that I hated or that I had issue with. And so then those feelings come up. When I was working with Holocaust survivors, many of them had lost their families, all of their family. And so I was coming into their space, providing all this help and providing care and attention. And so the transference was that I was their daughter, granddaughter, some case sister. So that could be used to our advantage and sometimes not so much. And then the opposite happens. There's countertransference. What is that person triggering in us? So then we need to be aware of it. And this is about self-awareness that we'll get into in a minute. The self-awareness that what are we being triggered? How are we being triggered in this case? One of the things before I even get here, just to remind you that these issues are great when it comes to personal relationships, whether it's with a spouse or a family member. If you're having issues with those, I use these techniques constantly in the work that I do with families, with couples. So it's always good to use these skills. Something really, really important that I can't gloss over in any conflict, especially in this day and age and this paradigm shift, as Reb Zalman would say, is money. In order to be able to do what we want to do, we need the resources. And sometimes we can pull out our wallets and be able to pay for it ourselves, but sometimes we need other people's money and their resources. The money allows us to do what we want to do, whether we have a physical structure. I remember the shul at Bell Harbor did a commercial, a fundraising commercial, and the rabbi sat behind his desk and talked about toilet paper, that somebody needed to pay for the toilet paper. Somebody needs to pay for the security guards, unfortunately. Somebody needs to pay for the upkeep of the building. Somebody needs to pay for the rabbi and the chazan and anybody else, the custodial workers. But even if you have a Zumagog, as Rabbi Mark Novak calls it, you still need the money. You need to be able to pay for the technology, to update the technology. You need to pay for some music because we have to honor the people who write the music and perform it. We need to also be able to advertise, to let people know that we exist. So there's this fine line, this balance. So then there's the power and influence. If you've got a building, you have to worry about zoning. You have to worry about all the things, now that with Roe versus Wade and how that's influencing, affecting the Jewish community, where abortion is not really an issue with Jews. Then do we sue? Are we part of? There's a group of rabbis here in South Florida that are suing the Supreme Court, that's suing the state of Florida because of that. So influence is really important, so we need that. But at the same time, there's boundaries, and I'll talk a little bit more about boundaries later, but boundaries are really important. I have a couple, a woman that I've been working with. This woman had been alone for many years and got married to this guy and discovered that he had a mental illness and he was emotionally abusive. And I've said, well, you can leave. But the problem is she can't leave. And the reason she can't leave is because financially she's dependent on him. She wants that level of financial, that lifestyle that she wants and she needs. Same way with us. If somebody is being icky, then we have to determine if we're going to want to continue being with that person, being involved with that person. That is part of the ethics committee, that we have to decide if this person is worthy in our community. Verbal abuse, emotional abuse, you can turn that off right away. But physical abuse, somebody touching inappropriately or harassing inappropriately, that person needs to really be considered whether that person is worthy and whether the money is worth it. So I just wanted to bring that in, and I'm sure there'll be discussion about that. So we'll wait until I'm finished. So this is something, I don't remember if this was a Musar class that I learned this from, or Viktor Frankl, or both. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Germany who was at Auschwitz. And I love this analogy, and I use it constantly with people who are involved with relationships. You have a fuse here. This is a bomb. This is a match. The bomb is the stimulus. The match is what you're going to do. So the closer you get to the bomb, to the fuse, the more you're going to have a reaction, an explosion. The further and further away from the match gets to the fuse, that's your greatest freedom. So that's a decision that you make, how you're going to respond versus react. So if you have that space, the further away from the fuse you are, the match might just go out, extinguish, and then you won't have to deal with the reaction, which brings a lot of messiness. Imagine a bomb going off and how messy that can be. So this is your greatest freedom, is the the response you make, what you do after the stimulus. So this is a Buddhist concept, the need to be right versus the need to be happy. And sometimes our ego gets in the way and we say, okay, you're wrong, I'm right. But we can't convince the other person that we're right. Maybe we can, but the odds are probably not. So, but the reality is that you are right. Based on your world and your world vision and the filter that you have as you were growing up and your perspective of things, you are right. The other person is right too, because based on their world and their worldview and how they grew up and all the things going on in their life, they're right. But then the question is, now what? What do you do with that when you know both sides are entrenched in their rightness? So then you have to determine, how happy do you want to be? How peaceful do you want to be? So rain, and this is not rain Zohar. This is rain based on a practice, meditation practice by Tara Brach, a Buddhist practitioner. So RAIN is an acronym and it says recognize. So what are you recognizing? You're recognizing the feelings that you're having because of this person. This person is bringing out stuff. And you start to feel it in your chest or your throat, your neck, your shoulders, your stomach, whatever it is, your back, whatever it is, you're recognizing that something is being triggered. You acknowledge it. Yes, I am feeling this way. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling resentful. I'm feeling grief. Whatever it is you're feeling, investigate it, because the odds are the person who is getting you upset is not really the person who caused that this is being triggered by. It's triggering, but it's a memory that happened many, 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 many years ago, depending on how many years of life experience you've had. So the Sufis say that it's every 7 years, and even Reb Zalman said we need to look at our lives in seven-year moments. And so we investigate what's going on and what is being triggered and how are we feeling and what is being triggered in that. And then we need to nurture ourselves. We need to just say, okay, how do I do some self-care here? So that when you are able, so this is the what we do in that freedom that I spoke about before, that we have this freedom to decide how we're going to respond to any given situation. But the most important thing is to detach from what's upsetting us, figure out what's going on and how do we respond in an appropriate way. Words have meaning. If we think about creation, Bereshit, we know that the very first thing created was the word. And through the word, the world was created. So words have meaning. So what we say to someone and how we say it can either heal that person or hurt them. And sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So there's an adage that if you couch something critical, rebuke someone, that if you say it with kindness first, you say something in terms of a compliment first, then the rebuke, and then a compliment again. So we sandwich it into kindness, the rebuke, and then the kindness again, so that, and we say it in a very soft way so that they could hear it, but at the same time, we also don't hurt that person. So I was talking with someone who was actually a diplomat in the diplomatic corps, and she said, what you're talking about is diplomacy. And so part of diplomacy is tact, the ability to tell the truth. Let me move here. In a way that considers other people's feelings and reactions. It allows you to give difficult feedback, communicate sensitive information, and say the right thing to the present relationship. Tact encompasses many things, including emotional intelligence, which is something that Daniel Goleman talked about in his book about emotional intelligence. And also he does another book called Social Intelligence. Respect, discretion, self-awareness, thoughtfulness, compassion, subtlety, honesty, diplomacy, and courtesy. So all of these things come together to resolve conflict. We need to be aware and also be respectful of the other person, because they are, again, as we keep reminding, that they are in the image of God as well as we are. So emotional intelligence, what is it? It's the ability to pick up on the other person's emotional cues, the ability, to be sensitive to the other person, and the ability to pay attention to your own emotions as they arise. So when you see someone who is frowning, then your odds are they're not very happy. And you can ask, what's going on? Is there anything that you want to talk about? So someone's happy, they're going to smile. So you pick up the energies of the other person and be aware of it and be sensitive to that, because they are dealing with something else, not just with you, but they also may be doing other things. They might have to deal with children, they might have to deal with the spouse, they might have to deal with their job, they might have to deal with the IRS, whatever it is. So they've got baggage too, as well as you. You've got the baggage too. So we need to be sensitive to each other as we deal with conflict. So there's 5 elements of emotional intelligence. First is self-awareness. What's going on with us? Tara Brach says, when you stop every once in a while and just kind of look at the different zones of your body and what's being tense, then you could be aware of what's happening in your relationship with the other person. So then there's self-regulation. How do we regulate our emotions? By self-soothing, maybe, by, turning on some music, by lighting a candle, whatever it is, taking a bath. I heard this it's bizarre actually, but it's something for neurodiversity, diverse people, is to stick your face in a bowl of ice water. But you can also hold a handful of ice cubes too. That brings you back into the present moment. What's the motivation? Why would someone post something that might be hurtful? What is their inner motivation? And what is our motivation in responding to that? How can we be empathetic? Empathetic to the other person who might be in some pain, or empathetic to ourselves. So how do we take care of ourselves? And social skills. Certainly not being mean is not going to work. Kindness, or as Reb Sheffa says, how can you bring love into the situation? So we're trying to bring social skills out. We need to do that as clergy. How do we become, in a sense, a little better than the others? Because we're the ones that they're looking to deal with any conflict. So we do that by respect. Respect is essential for any relationship. And the reality is you don't have to love everyone. It's not going to work. You can't love everyone, but you can be mindful of boundaries, your boundaries and their boundaries. And to be respectful, it's like the 6 feet distance, social distancing. For me, it's like physical distancing as opposed to social distancing, because you want to be, appropriately intimate with someone in terms of being able to open your heart and be kind to someone. But at the same time, you want to respect their boundaries. Some people don't want to be touched. Some people don't mind a hug every once in a while. So then the question is, how can you be so wrong? So in that case, we're being judgmental. And the battles of, as I said, no one is right and no one is wrong. And nobody is to blame, and nobody, but we all have to take responsibility in what we do. Our thoughts, actions, feelings are our responsibility. What other people do, their thoughts, actions, and feelings, as long as it doesn't affect me, that's their business. So one of the things, the key learnings that I've learned recently is stay in your own lane. So if somebody wants to drive off a cliff, I might say, watch out, but it's up to them if they want to drive off the cliff. So some empathetic questions. Would you help me understand why you're feeling this way? How would you like things to be different? And if you could change one thing, what would it be? The intent is for people to figure out why they're being a certain way and to be motivated to change. And then, as I said, taking responsibility in the disagreement or the conflict. What am I doing to inflame this situation? And maybe I need to back off and just say, okay, let that person have what they need to do to say what they need to say, and let them handle and deal with the consequences. And above all else, I'll leave this with a sense of humor. I was highly offended when some clients would call me a Nazi. And I said to myself, wait, how could that be? It's so ironic that I, as a child and grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, would be called a Nazi. And then I reframed it and said, then I'm doing my job. That a lot of the things that I'm saying and doing are based on the programming the funders want me to do. And if they want to see me that way, that's on them. So thinking in terms of the last situation, how, David Kessler, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in determining the cycles of grief, what he said is find meaning. So in a sense, what the latest brouhaha was, it brought attention to what we need to do as an organization to look at our ethics and how we treat other people. So again, I'm going to leave this with what Reb Shefa says, how can we bring love into this situation? So thank you. I'm going to stop the share. If anybody has any questions or comments, concerns, all that, and I'm glad that you're here with me to take me off of spotlight. But I'm interested in any comments or any questions you might have. Yes, Ray. You have to unmute. You have to unmute yourself. There we go. Unmute.
There we go. Unmute. If you have notes, can you share these with me and anyone else?
I'll put it on the list.
That would be really lovely. Thank you, because it was a lot to take in.
And we'll have the recording of this also. You'll be able to watch again and take notes.
Great, cool. Well, yeah, I can't take notes from when I'm holding up my phone to listen. But just if you can send them, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my question while I percolate with I think the key question really is, how can we, as Shefa says, how can we bring love, but also how can we be fair? And how do we deal with our own emotions so that we can listen fully? And I do want to tell people that we are working very hard to get completion on the ethics interim ethics code update, and looking for feedback from the community. So it will be a transparent process there. And I had no idea that there were unresolved ethics complaints hanging there. So I just want to apologize to anyone that's impacted, or just generally you may have heard. There were a lot of unresolved, unfinished things, a lot. And I think part of it's from our growth. And slowly I'm trying to check those off and get those all tied up, but it takes some time. And we are all volunteers. So Rahmanis is very appreciated.
And patience. Thank you, Rain. Carl.
Yeah, so I think it's important as we have this conversation, and I'm not dealing with any particular instance, that we look at what are the sources of conflict. So first how do we deal with conflict? But we need to look at what the sources of conflict are. And then aside from what we've already discussed, power imbalances and ineffective communication, what there is often lack of transparency, lack of communication, ineffective dispute resolution is a good way to cause conflict, competition. I have a whole list here from when I used to work a lot with this, and patterns that don't allow the time for resolution when you have those things. So we have to have an acknowledgement that there are lots of sources for conflict. And that doesn't mean conflict is bad. It just means there are lots of sources. And when we look at the different sources, that allows us to look at the different means for conflict resolution. And I remember when I did my first mediation training, the trainer went around the room and put these signs up that said, "We don't avoid conflict, we resolve conflict." And I remember saying to him, "Wait a minute, I came here because I want to avoid conflict. I'm tired of conflict. Don't tell me we don't avoid it." And he came from conflict is good. Conflict causes us to think. Conflict causes us to not just go along as if everything's okay. So he said, conflict's good. What we have to learn is how to resolve it, not how to avoid it. And, so that's a big deal. We have to see what the sources are and then learn not to avoid it. And that is one method of conflict resolution, is just to always avoid it. It just eventually it'll bite you in the tush. So
Right, it comes out.
Yeah, you can't avoid it forever.
Mhm.
So thank you for
And
listening.
it's growth. You have to have it, you have to rub up against each other for the growth part. Shefa, did you want to say something?
Well, it was a lot along the lines of what Carl was talking about. I studied with someone named Dr. David Schnarch, who was a friend of Reb Zalman's and was a family therapist and a sex therapist. And I had never met anybody who was like excited about conflict as much as him. And it wasn't, and it made me aware of how conflict averse I am and how much trouble we get into, because not only just tolerating conflict, but actually opening to it as a crucible, as something that's going to bring us to a new level. And so I've been working in myself with like where the fear is of conflict, and how I might just get a better attitude towards it, because I also run the other direction. And so, but to be able to see it as love, as love, really, like at its source, at its root, there's love, and to be able to find the love in it, it's like, but it's a love that has gone kind of screwy, and so that love needs refinement. And so yeah, I guess I wanted to be I think what you said, Carl, was really important, as just even before we even go to the conflict, of how do we come to it without fear, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're always looking for security and safety. Judith.
So I'm a family therapist. I do therapy as you do with individuals and couples. And I'm very aware that our style of dealing with conflict probably will relate to what was or wasn't safe in our own family of origin. And that it's very helpful to get familiar with the situation of family of origin and the very natural fears and defenses we've developed, make us super sensitive to certain things that can happen. And so that we can try to hold them safely, you know, and still move the way we would like to with any conflict we're in. So it's going to bring that up.
Right. So it usually happens way before we even meet the person. Yes, Lisa.
I think that's really important. That's why in CPE, we study a lot of our family's origin and we work with all of that. I just wanted everyone to know that this topic was chosen long before last week. And it was just sort of, it was a coincidence that this happened because of all the stuff that's going on in the Ohala listserv. But there's been a lot of other things that have happened in there. It's kind of a percolator for conflict. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, you know, I heard everybody talking about the Dalai Lama on both sides of the issue. And I heard there were other issues. There's been many, many issues on many, many things. This hits closer to home because it's about us. It's not about someone else. It's about us and our relationships. And it hit a lot of people in a very strong way because they're personally involved. And I think that's kind of what I want to mention. There's this boundary, you know, when you're personally involved with something and it affects you personally, you tend, you know, the match is closer to the bomb. And you have to, yes, we do have to separate ourselves in some way. And I have no control over any of that. I didn't have control over any of this. I did have a control over how I responded, and I almost didn't respond at all. But then I couldn't run from that conflict because it was an old wound that I had felt I needed to help resolve. But in the long run, Carl helped me understand some of the otherness of that. There's an other side, there's an otherness that we must envelop in our own self. It cannot just be from our perspective. There's always the other person's side. There's always a backstory. There's always that person's childhood. There's always the everything on the other side that has to be part of our understanding of it. Otherwise, we can never resolve these conflicts. I mean, look at the Palestinian-Israeli thing that we say, we can never resolve. We can, and it comes from understanding the other's point of view. So having said all that, I just want to thank everybody for being part of this. I don't want to turn away from it. On the other hand, I don't want us to you know, sort of be a bunch of people. I watched Beauty and the Beast the other night, and I was thinking all those people with the sticks running towards the castle, you know, they're going to burn it down. And we don't want to do that either, because there are people involved here and there are feelings involved here, and we're part of a family. And in a family situation like this, we really do have to use those tools that Chaya gave us, like, even more carefully. So I hope that we'll do that. And I also apologize that I'm throwing a huge party for my son's birthday and I'm going to have to leave. But I thank you all for continuing this conversation, and we're recording it, so I'll go back and watch the rest of that.
Thank you, Lisa. So I just want to say why before I call on Carl, I just said that I want to raise the level of the RPA, and I think that we don't get enough training post smicha in pastoral education. And so I think that's kind of where I want to bring the RPA in and help the rabbinic pastors and the other clergy. But it was interesting because way before the Dalai Lama, way before Israel Palestine, way before DDK, I had asked my Mismachot class, what would you like to learn about? And someone said conflict resolution and dealing with boards. And then all of this hit the fan, and I looked at Reb J and just said, it's where's kindness in all of this? And, and I just thought it's so ironic that here I was posting a very innocuous invitation, and the issue of conflict resolution came up. And, so we have to look at it from a sense of humor that, sometimes these things play out and we have to deal with it. First, Carl, and then Shefa. Carl.
Yeah. So Lisa, first of all, you never have to apologize for going to a birthday party for a child. That's just
He's my big guy. He's 29 years old.
that's
but-
just a given. But I do want to point to well, two things or three things. Rev Chaya said something that I think was so important that it kind of didn't become a major thing, and I think it's a major thing. And that's in most conflicts, in all upsets, you're never upset about what you think you're upset about. You're upset about something from before, and this just triggers that. And that's part of in all the conflicting conversations that I've seen on our listserv, not just this last one, but the ones before that, you can almost feel the other stuff that's going on in people's minds when they're talking about this conflict. It's like they're talking about this conflict and you can hear them say, you did da-da-da, just like my father used to do. But the just like my father used to do isn't written down. So it's so important that, and you said that, Chaya, and I just love that you said that, but I want to highlight it. It's so important that we look at not just what we think we're upset about, but what it's really driving up for us. So I just want to really highlight that. The second thing is you said that you didn't think there was enough post-smicha pastoral education. I don't think there's enough pre-smicha pastoral education, even for the rabbinic students or for the rabbinic pastor students. We need more of these subjects taught within our program, but you've heard me talk about that stuff before. So, and I do have a last thing, which is just as most of you know, I've done a lot of work on conflict resolution. I spent the last 40 years doing divorce mediation with couples in trauma, teaching dispute resolution, but it's always been from a legal point of view. And Chaya, I love that you did this today from a non-legal point of view. And I have a whole page and a half of notes, which is great for me when I'm listening to someone else talk about conflict resolution, which lets me leave with one last story. That first training that I told you about, the guy who led the divorce mediation training had a background in theology. And it's a 40-hour training, which is the traditional divorce mediation training. And he had 2 hours one evening where he did a thing about the calling to be a mediator, the theology of mediation, the spirituality of mediation. And it was an optional 2 hours, and I didn't go. And I ran into him 30 years later, and I said, I'm really so embarrassed that I didn't go to that because I couldn't see anything spiritual about divorce mediation. And now I'm in a rabbinic pastor program, and we all got to laugh about it. But dispute resolution is a theological issue. So I'm so glad that you did conflict resolution today. So thank you from me personally to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rev Carl. Shefa.
Maybe if Katya wants to talk first, and she hasn't talked yet.
Oh, okay, Katya. Thank you, Shefa. See, conflict resolution resolved. Go ahead, Katya.
Actually, it wasn't a conflict. Thank you, Shefa. Yeah, a lot of good tools. In a perfect world, they should all work. And like Carl said, there's always a backstory. There's always undercurrents, more than one of them. And I would thank God for that backstory sometime. because that backstory can give us passion that can help us create social change. Things that happened to me when I was younger have given me the strength and the courage that when I see this in another situation, I can help to write it. So where do we go with all this, and what do we, how do we temper it? How do we balance it? Because we would love to think that everybody given the opportunity would do the right thing. Is that true? No.
No,
That's where abuse of power comes from. That's where boundary issues come from. So how do we stand? Where do we balance this? What is the dance that keeps love at the center? Love for us, love for others, love for those who don't see who don't see things the way we see things. It's all a great mess. It's all, so we dance with that. We work with that. We balance with that. And that changes with each situation.
yes,
We have, these are great tools and we apply them differently. It's like, working that I do with families and the traumas that I deal with. Every dynamic is different. So how do we balance that? How do we identify it and give each situation the honor that it deserves and all is involved? So thank you so much for presenting what you did. You really, a lot of great tools. Everything you were saying going, yeah. So presenting it in a very understandable, transmutable way. But like I said, we still have a lot of work to do. So thank you.
yes, we do. We're constantly learning. Shefa,
Yeah, I wanted to just bring a couple of things. One is the tool that I use that I call the 2080 rule, which is very helpful to me. That every time I get triggered, I know that 20% of it is about present time and 80% about it is something else that I need to go investigate. But it's every single trigger. And so I teach this to people who, what to do when you get triggered, because it doesn't mean it's not at all about present time. That's 20% is. But when you deal with the 80%, then the 20% becomes manageable, right? So that's the the 20-80 rule is always in the back of my mind in working with stuff. The other thing is that I study NVC and nonviolent communication. I'm part of an NVC group that I go to every month in my community. And what I've learned from that more than anything is the role of empathy, that in every conflict, that often it's not the first place that I naturally go. And so that's like kind of a retraining of myself, is to be able to go to empathy first and then go to what I think is the truth, really. And it's just, changed me. That study has changed me. And the other thing I just want to say that through this whole thing that's happened with the ethics stuff is that I'm not on the ethics committee now, but I was on it for many years. And I was on it because I wanted to learn really what goes wrong. And I found out how much more complicated it is. And I also found that the ethics committee has very strict confidentiality and protocols. It's very, it is like, it's so structured in that way. And that feels like it, conflicts with our, the need for transparency that people are talking about. And that what I learned being on the ethics committee is that like transparency was not the first value. The first value had to do with a kind of a process of untangling that absolutely needed this very strict confidentiality to it. So, as I was, in seeing what was going on the list, I'm like, you don't understand. And the other reason I was on the ethics committee is because I loved the people who were doing it and the integrity that they brought to it. And I really felt bad that integrity was being kind of, maligned in some way, because there's so much, generosity and so much work behind the scenes that happens that you wouldn't know unless you were in it. So.
Thank you, Shefra. Yes, Rain. You have to unmute yourself. Let me unmute you.
Thank
There
you.
go.
You have to put it and then it says unmute.
Okay.
So, yes, so I'm just learning all of this. And frankly, I think the confidentiality structures of our past ethics code need updating so that some communication can happen, letting people know what kinds, letting the complainants know what actions have been taken, and in a way that is respectful. But there's definitely some updating. And the other thing I wanted to say is I had come to Chaya and Lisa asking if the rabbinic pastors would do some trainings for our Havra. A few of us on the board had done some calling to members to see how we could serve them better. And one person in particular said they thought it would be really helpful to have more training in how to self-care during this hard COVID time, and also how to help our congregants and our Kavra deal with these very, very, very hard times. And Chaya was like, well, we already have 3 trainings in the works, which was like so beautiful. So I think it's true that we can always keep learning. We can always keep learning. And Carl, I want to maybe have some conversations with you or consultation around our updated ethics. It's not my area of expertise, but I'm a pretty quick learner. And I want to acknowledge I am feeling just a tad criticized, which 80% is past. And I will deal with that so I can be, the best guide to bringing these important issues to a good, even if it's interim, and then we do more work so that we'll have a more workable ethics procedure, and that any outstanding complaints will be resolved in a more timely manner. I am someone that kind of likes closure, so that will come in handy right now, I think, because there's been a lot of process, and very, like that Shefa said, I had no idea the amount of time and effort people had put in meeting every month, every week for hours, trying to untangle ethics complaints in a restorative justice manner, which is new to all of us. We pretty much all grew up with a punitive justice processes, and in Ohala, we really hope to learn how to be restorative. So I don't want us to leave. Well, I know Carl has his hand up. I don't want to leave without a nigun from somebody. I'm just going to put that out as a little personal request, Raya. You can call him someone if it's
So
not.
I before I call Matya and Carl, I just want to say that and we're going to skip July because of Kala, and hope everybody will be there. And on August 30th, D. Herman, Rabbinic Pastor D. Herman, will be doing a training on self-care that she's actually doing for Smicha Week, and has agreed to do that for us. So Matya, and somebody needs to do a nigun, because I don't do nigun. So Matya, go ahead.
So there's so much wisdom in this group. Thank you so much. And Carl and Rain, I would like to be part of that conversation. I am currently on the ethics committee and have been involved with the last few years. I had to recuse myself from this particular issue for various reasons, but I've been hearing from a lot of different sides being on the ethics committee. There's a lot to hold, a lot to hold. One of the things that would help me, perhaps a training on how do we protect ourselves energetically? What do we do to get the flow going again? How do we support both sides, really, in nonviolent communication, which I'm not as trained as Shefa, but I've had some training. What I keep going back to is what is the need that's being expressed underneath the question? And there is definitely need in this particular situation on both sides. And because of the transparency, because of the way this the process has been with restorative justice, it's unclear. There needs to be some clarification in the process, I think. Perhaps even a training on restorative justice so people understand the difference in mediation, Carl, the difference between that and between a punitive situation. So I so appreciate everything that people have been saying today. There's still work to do. Include me as a support on the support team. I want to learn more. And we have work to do, but we can get through it. We can do it. And there's such good intentions behind all of this.
Thank you. So I think that, you know, as I think about trainings that that nonviolent communication is someone that I'll be looking for training, and also restorative justice. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, I think Kat is a real resource for that. I know she does nonviolent communication trainings, and she's done some great work in that regard. I just want to point out, when we're dealing with ethics, and in fact, when we're dealing with all personnel matters, the idea of there being confidentiality and secrecy, for lack of a better term, it's really important. People won't get involved. They won't file complaints. They won't respond to complaints unless they know they're safe and protected. That's different from the body politics need for some knowledge, need for understanding that things have been resolved, that things have been taken care of. That's the transparency. It is people knowing that things were handled. There was a long time ago, if you remember, we had the subway killing, the guy that killed the kids on the subways. I can't remember what his name was. They were being a little violent, and he pulled out a gun and killed them on the subways in New York. And it turns out that he had been assaulted once before, and the people who had assaulted him before went to jail as part of a plea bargain, but he never knew it. So he had no closure. He had no sense that anything had been done. And then he reacted to that by pulling out a gun and shooting people. And that's for me, that's the transparency issue. It's not that what's been discussed should be disclosed, but the completion needs to be disclosed so people know it's been taken care of. Otherwise, you have just, and I will say one last thing about Aleph. God bless everybody in Aleph. I love us all dearly. The amount of gossiping we do, the amount of conversations we have under the line is not tolerable for an organization that's committed to what we're committed to. And when you gossip, it just gets further and further down the line. So,
okay, I really need people to be able to distinguish between Aleph and Ohala. Because
I'm going to yes, and I'm going to say at this point, both of them suffer from that. And it's a human condition. It's not like I'm saying where we should be superhuman, but we should just check ourselves when we start to say things I heard, and I'm really bad at this because I hear a lot. People like to talk to me, and then it affects what I say next. I heard, I heard is not a really good start to a conversation.
Is
So
it
sorry.
true or is it kind? Yes. Chaya, last word, and somebody offer to do a Nagun, please.
I just want to clarify when I said that I heard things about certain things that it was not gossip, and it was not within that at all. And I agree with you, Carl. There are boundaries that need to be.
Yeah.
kept.
Much. I wasn't talking about you at all there. I was talking about some of the things I've heard from people in response to the emails. I got calls saying, well, this is why that was there, and it was complete gossip. So sorry.
Boundaries, yes.
Boundaries are important. Patience. It's a virtue, I understand. Anybody want to call up a Nagun as we end?
So if Sheffer doesn't want to or prefers that someone else does it, I'd love to share a little piece.
Please, I was going to, but
Thank you, Chaya.
Do you,
not to.
Maybe we could have two.
yeah, we definitely.
That would be enjoyable.
Shalom, 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 shalom. Let there be peace. Let there be love. Let there be calm. Let there be patience. We need courage. We need wisdom. We need empathy. We need safety. We need openness. We need friendship. We need grace. We need justice. Shalom. 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 Send us more love. Send us more hope. Send us more empathy. Send us more justice. We need to not run from the conflict. We need to be open to change. Shlemut, 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 Shlemut. We need wholeness. We need wholeness. We need wholeness. We need you. We need you. We need you. We need each other. We need each other. Shalom. Shalom. Shalom.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Shefra, do you want to do something?
No, I think we're good.
Good. Well, thank you for joining me. We'll see you at Kala, God willing, and August 30th. Thank you.
So, you know,
Everybody have
it's like
Shavua Tov.
the Shabbat service that I'm leading at Kala is all about how we take the Pinchas energy, which is so raw, and refine it and cultivate it and kind of transform it into love. So I think this is part of what the work is.
Looking forward to that.
Work in progress.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much. This is
Shavuot everybody.
Thank
well,
you.
everyone.